Okay, shalom. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Kabbalah Café, which is being sponsored by Ellie and Jacqueline Jaffe, in memory of Mr. Dr. Moshe Morris Jaffe, Moshe Avram Ben Zev. And so we started telling a story about Rabbi Gorelik, who was the chief shaliach of Italy, and he was about to go to sleep. He had already changed and ready in bed, and he gets a phone call many years ago from Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's personal secretary. And he says to him, "Are you sleeping?" He says, "No, I'm up." Why are you asking? What does Rebbe want? I'm ready. He says, "Are you sleeping?" He says, "Well, I'm sort of going to sleep, but..." So he says, the Rabbi Chadakov, he was a very sharp person. He says, "How could you be sleeping if there is a Jewish child in Italy that does not yet have Jewish education?"
Oh my God.
So that was the ruach, the spirit of how the Rebbe viewed things, and how the Rebbe's secretary, he was the one that ran all of the outreach work. We talk about Moshe Rabbeinu in a couple of weeks. Moshe Rabbeinu, Kasher Yisa Ha'oman et Hayonek, like the professional carries a child. Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned for every single child, every single person, and he was able to feel if someone was drifting away a little bit too far. Now Moshe came from the tribe of Levi. The parasha shelanu, parashat Bamidbar, Hakadosh Baruch Hu sofer et Am Yisrael. Hashem counts every single Jew and also counts all of the tribes. But Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi, they were special. What was their job? Their job was to carry the objects of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. They carried the Aron, the Shulchan, the menorah, and this was a very great zechut. Madua dafka hem zachu. Why did only the tribe of Levi merit to carry the objects, the holy artifacts of the Beit HaMikdash? Also, we know that the tribe of Levi, they were the ones during the slavery in Mitzrayim and Egypt. The tribe of Levi, they learned Torah the entire day. If you saw my video that I prepared yesterday for the Shabbos, if not, you could still see it after the class. And so, the tribe of Levi, they were not part of the shiabud. They were not part of the enslavery. Because they learned Torah, that gave them an extra zechut, an extra merit to be able not to be enslaved, not to be mishuabadim for the hard slave labor from Paro. Maybe it should have been the tribe of Reuven. Maybe the Reuven, they were the firstborn. He was the firstborn. Maybe it should have been Yehuda. Yehuda was all the kings come from Yehuda. Maybe they should be the ones to carry the holy artifacts of the Mishkan. So it's very interesting. The Baal Shem Tov next week is going to be the Baal Shem Tov's yahrzeit. It turns out to be that the Baal Shem Tov passed away on the first day, we think, the first day of Shavuot, and he was buried on the second day of Shavuot. He was buried on Zayin Sivan. One of the only two things that you're allowed, that the second day of the Chag, here in Israel we only have one day, but the second day of the Chag is a tiny drop more lenient than the first day of the Chag. So if someone passes away, God forbid, on the first day of the Chag, you're not allowed to, it's like Shabbos, not allowed to touch the body, and it's muksa. But on the second day, you're allowed to bury under certain circumstances. And so the Baal Shem Tov, the holy Baal Shem Tov, was buried on the second day of Shavuot, on Zion. David HaMelech, interestingly enough, we know that he passed away on Shavuot, but we're not sure if it was the first day. Actually, it was here in Israel, so it was only one day. But in Chutz La'aretz, we think that in Chutz La'aretz, in other words, he passed away on Zion. And so there is a remez, there is a hint to the fact that David HaMelech passed away on the second day of Shavuot, because in the Tehillim, remember, it's divided up into the days of the month. Every day we announce today is a 26th day of Iyar. On the seventh day, the Tehillim begins on chapter Lametet 39. And over there in chapter Lametet, for the seventh day of the month, it says, Hodi'eni Hashem Kitzi. May Hashem let me know my end. So that's what David HaMelech says on that day. So it's a remes, it's a hint for us. But getting back to the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov says something very fundamental. He says that the Hebrew language of the holy language of Lashon HaKodesh, the Me'od Meduyak. It's very exact. So if you want to know something, what is anything about it, just find out what it's called in Lashon HaKodesh. So let's look at Levi. Levi had three sons: Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. Moshe Rabbeinu came from Kahat. Kahat had four sons, and Moshe Rabbeinu, Amram, Yitzhar, Chevron, Uziel. And Moshe comes from Amram. Moshe only had two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. And so I hope I corrected that. We'll make sure in the edited version that Moshe did not have four sons, Moshe had two sons. And so if we want to find out about Levi, so let's find out, why did he name his sons the names that he named them? So we look into the book of the Holy Shalah, Rabbi Yeshaya Horovitz. B'shama anachnu lomdim. Over there we can see what was Levi all about. When a person calls names to his sons, so it shows what kind of a person he was. What was on his mind? Levi mitbarer shehu yada hashevet shalo lo yukshurim la. He knew that his family, Gershon was the first son of Levi. What is Gershon? Gershon, the reason why he called his son Gershon is because he knew that the children are, what is Gershon? Ger, from the word of ger, like a convert. He knew that we, Am Yisrael, we're all converts. We're all in a strange land. We're all not supposed to be over here in a strange land. The Domem Od Gershon. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's son. Ukarala ben shelo Gershon. Ki ger hayiti be'eretz Nachriya. Kahat. Why did he call his second son Kahat? Because it's an expression that the teeth became black from Am Yisrael. They worked so hard, so he knew that Am Yisrael is going to end up in a very difficult situation, and so he wanted to be part. He wanted his family, in a sense, at least in a spiritual sense, lihizdaot, to become part of the experience of the Am Yisrael. Merari. It sounds like the word maror, bitter. That's why he called the third son Merari. That they should be that their lives became bitter. To teach us that a person needs to take part in their friends' pain and suffering. That's why.
The Levites were not slaves.
Correct.
So why would he want
So that shows that he wanted him to be part, at least to identify. In other words, he could have said, "Oh, I don't care. It's nothing to do with me. It's a Shara Shvatim. It's the other tribes." But he knew that he's going to be, and so this is why it says, "Ve'ele shnei chayei Levi." These are the years of Levi, because when we found out that Levi had passed away, then that's when the slavery began. The third son of Yaakov Avinu, when he passed away, Kolzman, all the while that he was alive, then there was the actual shi'abud, the actual slavery had not yet begun. But Levi knew what's going to be. Al Shem Ha'atid. A lot of places in the beginning of the Torah, different Naharot, different rivers are called Al Shem Ha'atid, the way it's going to be later. And so Levi was a tzaddik, and he knew, unfortunately, what was going to be. Bless you. The slavery of Am Yisrael. He was the only one. He was the only one who called his names for what's going to be. For example, another place where we see an interesting thing was where Binyamin, he had 10 sons, and his brother Yosef had been sold. They had no idea where he was. And each one of his 10 sons, he called them a name which expressed his yearning for his brother, for Yosef. And so we see that calling a name is not just a name. When you call a name of a child, of a baby, you want to call a name that maybe has the same name of a tzaddik or a name of a grandparent to keep up the energy and the good zechuyot, the good merits of what the person had. So the message over here today that we're learning today is about how we're supposed to participate in someone else's pain, in someone else's sorrow. And there are different ways how to do that, but in order to accomplish that, we have to first remember what is the source of separation. And once we understand what is the source of separation, then we can try to blend together and bring people together. Shlomo HaMelech says, King Shlomo says, L'tava yivakesh nifrad. Someone who wants to go after his own bodily cravings, then that comes from nifrad. He's separating himself from others. When you want to connect, then the best thing is to deal with the spirituality. Because when we're very much engrossed into our materialism, then that comes from, and that perhaps can create more. But when a person learns how to look at their friend, or look at a colleague with being, with lenses, with glasses of looking into their neshama, then right away that brings the connection between the two. Many years ago, there was a boy who invited his friends over to their house. When they were at the house, then the father overheard the conversation between the children, and they had a little bit of an argument, like a contest, who was the greatest tzaddik in the city. At the end, they came to an agreement that Rabbi Greenfeld is the greatest tzaddik. And what was their proof? How holy he was. They said, look, Rabbi Greenfeld has the longest beard in the city. So according to, in their little mind of the little children, that was their way of identifying who was the greatest tzaddik. It wasn't even the color; it was the length in their minds. When they're going to grow up, and they're going to realize that it's not only about the beard; it's also something which is inside, the quality of the person, and the way the person helps out, and the way the person connects between people. So it's our perspective. Once our perspective changes, then everything else can fit into place. But if here's the point: we are the ones who decide, who identify how we're going to think. Once we make a resolution that we're going to look at our colleague, our friend, our neighbor, our family, not as judging them as what they did or what they didn't do, but who they are, then we'll realize that the person has a beautiful neshama within them, and then obviously there's going to be ahavat Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew. When someone looks at their little baby in the crib, he loves the child with a tremendous love. Why? Because he's part of me. It's my child. So of course the person loves him. So you're not going to say that he loves the child because of something special they did, or they did a good job in school, they got a good mark, or they played nicely outside with their friends on the block. But for who the child is, once the child gets larger, grows up, then you start looking at the child's characteristics. When we say that Hashem loves Am Yisrael, we say in the pasuk, Hinar Yisrael v'ohaveyu. That Hashem loves us because we are a nar, just as we are a child, we're like a baby. That Hashem should not love us only because of the great accomplishments that we do. Rather, just for the fact that we are nar, the fact that we are children. One time, a woman came to the shliach, and she said, "I'm dating this guy, but there's something bothering me. He has a tick. Every 5 minutes, he has a tick in his shoulder." So he started explaining to her, you know what? Tell me about his qualities. So she says, he's a wonderful guy. He's so kind. He speaks to me nicely. He acts with respect. And I see how he talks about his parents. And this is the kind of guy that I want to marry. So he explains to her for 2 hours how important it is to zoom in onto what really counts and to put the little external things to the side. They ended up getting married. And years later, he asked her, tell me, what's with the tick? So she says,
What tick?
Which tick? It wasn't even an issue. It was zakol ne'alam. Obviously, a person has to come to the terms with it. A person has to marry someone. You want to make sure that you're doing the best job that you can. And thank God she had the Galut hamochin, the greatness of thought, to be able to put away the external things and to zoom in on what really counts. For us as human beings, it's hard because we're one of the examples. One of the examples for this is unfortunately with someone that's sitting shiva. A lot of people don't like to go because they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say. Lo na'im, it's not a comfortable setting, and they don't want to even put themselves in that place. But then some people come and they think that they have to give a whole speech to the person who's sitting shiva, and some people do even worse. They explain to them why it happened. They're really wise. And they say it's the person had a high neshama. It's noseb ol im chavero, someone that wants to really take part in the pain of someone else. It's very important to come to the shiva. My father told me when he was sitting shiva for his father, he told me, you should never know this, but it's the appreciation that someone has just by the fact that someone comes to sit there, just sitting there, that itself takes a tremendous amount of sorrow and suffering from whoever is sitting. And so this expression of Ahavat Yisrael is an extra special, is a very unique expression of Ahavat Yisrael, to be able to show how you care, show how you take part. Shemishtatzfim batzar shel mishu acher. We say in the Torah that if you have to l'recha kamocha, love your fellow Jew as yourself. Zeu kol Torah kula. That's the whole Torah. V'idach, and the rest of the Torah, pirushahu, is just an explanation of how you have to love your fellow Jew as yourself, which shows, which indicates how important it is, Ahavat Yisrael. It's not a separate thing from the whole Torah. This part, it's a pirush. It's an interpretation of that mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. איך אפשר באמת לאהוב יהודי אחר כמו שאנחנו אוהבים את עצמנו? How can we love? זה הכל מתחיל איך אנחנו מסתכלים על עצמנו. How do we love ourselves? You want to love someone else? It's the same thing with two children in a class and spouses. If you have an admiration for yourself, you can admire someone else. אם אנחנו יש לנו הערכה כלפי עצמנו, אז אנחנו יכולים גם לאהוב ולהעריך אחרים. אם מישהו לא אכפת לו מעצמו, אז איך הוא יכול להעריך אחרים? That's exactly what the mitzvah is. V'ahavta l'reacha. What's the next word? Kamocha. Yafeh. Kamocha. Just like you love yourself. So if a person doesn't love themselves, so he's gonna have trouble loving other people.
No, but I don't know spot.
יש דרגות בזה. יש דרגות בזה. כמה הוא צריך לאהוב את עצמו. זה לא צריך להיות head over heels. It doesn't have to be head over heels to love himself. לא להשתגע. But at least the point of Yesh Sipur Mod Meragesh, a very emotional story that happened in. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. יפה. החלל הראשון במבצע עופרת יצוקה היה דביר עמנואלוב. The first one that passed away. How do you say עופרת יצוקה in English? עופרת יצוקה, one of the recent wars over here in Eretz Yisrael. So his name, the first one that passed away, his name was the soldier Devir Immanuelov, and he was killed, unfortunately, from the Hamas. Devir's mother Dalia told the following amazing story. תקופה לאחר נפילתו של דביר היא הלכה להופעה של מאיר בנאי. הגיעה כמה דקות בטרם לפני שהתחילה ההופעה, והתיישבה במקום שלה. לאחר כמה שמישהו נוגע בה בכתף. היא ראתה ילד מתוק, והוא שאל אותה, היא שאלה אותו, איך קוראים לך? הוא אמר אשל. אז היא אמרה, אתה רוצה לשבת לידי? הוא אמר, כן, בשמחה. האבא, שישב כמה שורות מאחור, הבחין במה שקורה, והוא אמר, אשל, בוא תשב על ידי ועל יד דביר. כל פעם שאמא שמעה את השם דביר, אז הלב שלה קפץ. היא הסתובבה וראתה שאשל, שהאבא מחזיק תינוק, וקוראים לו דביר. אז דליה שאלה אותו בן כמה הוא, אז הוא אמר בן 6 חודשים. אז היא אמרה, רגע, הוא נולד לפני עופרת יצוקה או אחריה? אז הוא אמר אחרי. ולמה קראתם לו דביר? תקרא את האב. והאב אמר, קראנו לו דביר על שמו של החייל הראשון שנפל בעופרת יצוקה. כשדליה שמעה את זאת, כאילו הפסיקה לנשום. לכמה דקות. כשהיא חזרה לעצמה, היא אמרה להוריו של דביר הקטן, אני האמא של דביר. בשלב הזה הצטרפה לשיחה שירי, שהיא האמא של דביר. היא אמרה, לא נכון. איך קוראים מה השם משפחה שלך? אז דליה אמרה, גבריאלוב. ואיפה את גרה? בפסגת זאב בירושלים. וואו, אז שירי שיתפה את דליה ברגע שבו היא החליטה לקרוא לתינוק דביר. היא אמרה, הייתי בהיריון מתקדם, ועשו לי צילום, וראו שהמצב העובר לא משהו, ושחלילה הוא עלול ללקות במום קשה. אז היא חזרה הביתה, וזה היה כבר שבוע 34, והיא הייתה בלחץ היסטרי. פתחה את הרדיו, ושמעה שנפל החייל דביר גבריאלוב. מיד על המקום, היא החליטה לקרוא לתינוק, כשהוא ייוולד, על שמו של החייל הראשון. בעלה הסכים מיד, ודביר שלח לך עכשיו, לאמא, חיבוק מן השמיים. אז דליה אמרה, זה סיפור יהודי אופייני. זה קשור עם זה מאפיין את העם שלנו, שכל אחד משתתף בצער של השני. This first soldier that had passed away in the war of Oferet Yitzukah, so like several months afterwards, the mother of the soldier, her name was Dalia, and she went to a show of Meir Banai, and in the middle of the show, she feels a little fingers tapping her shoulder. So she turns around and she sees a little boy. She says to him, "What's your name?" So he says, "My name is Eshel." She says, "You want to come sit next to me?" He says, "Sure." Then the father is sitting a few rows back. He sees that he's sitting not where he's supposed to. So he says to Eshel, "Eshel, come sit back here with us. Come sit next to me and Ima and Dvir." Is the baby? She says 6 months. He says 6 months. So she says, before Oferet Yitzukah or after the war? So she says, right after the war. And why did you call your baby Dvir? So the father said, because the first soldier that that was killed. She was shocked. But the story had so the mother, Shiri, she said to Dahlia, I want to tell you why, at what point, at what moment we decided to call our baby Devir. She said that she had gone to the doctor for a checkup, and they gave her a report about the baby that was becoming very close to birth, and a serious problem, chas v'shalom, in his mind. And she was very, very depressed. She took it very, very hard. She came home and she heard in the radio about the first soldier that had passed away, that was murdered. And so she decided at that moment that her son is going to be named after the soldier, and her husband right away agreed. And so the mother, Dahlia, said, I'm not so surprised. I'm very emotional, but I'm not so surprised. That is a very Jewish thing, that each one participates in the experience, sometimes in the pain and suffering of someone else. To the extent, remember we talked in the beginning about why Levi, over here, we find this whole concept of how this family had called their name, their baby's name, on the name of the first soldier that had passed away. And so very often, in summary, very often we talk about Ahavat Yisrael in the positive sense. Almost every Friday, my wife Shashi arranges that young mothers that have just given birth should have food for Shabbos, and it's amazing how people cook in their own homes, and we arranged it to be brought to the. And if anybody wants, please feel free to let me know. And a lot of people say, "I'm making it ready anyways for my family. Not a big deal to put in an extra piece of chicken or another salad or a thing of soup." And or today someone's going to the prepared foods on Ibn Shaprut and buying. They don't want to prepare their own foods, so they're going to prepare foods to my home, and we're going to give it to young families who have just given birth. So Ahavat Yisrael is something which is very special in the positives, and no question about that. But we also have to remember, we also have to remember about how we can participate in someone else's pain and suffering. That is also a special way of participating in Ahavat Yisrael. Like I started saying in the beginning about, for example, someone that loses a loved one. Just being there, just sitting there next to them. We don't have to speak. In fact, according to the halacha, you're not allowed to speak until the mourner starts to speak. We think we have to say something. We think we have to. I remember there was it was exactly like 17 years ago. I was a shliach in upstate New York, in New City, and one day we got a phone call. It was a great family. I'm still connected with them. They had 3 children, triplet daughters, triplet girls. And in the middle of the day, one day, middle of the summer, they were in an overnight camp not far from Rockland County, and got a phone call that one of them they didn't feel good, and then they took her to the hospital, and within an hour she passed away. Nyack Hospital, right in Rockland County. Terrible, terrible story. And so they said, you're a rabbi, so go and, they'll tell you where they are and go be there with the family. It's impossible to explain in words. How difficult it is to be there with someone. And it was before the funeral, and they're sitting right there in the same room. It's just, no one should ever even think about such a. And so there were another 2 rabbis there in the room. And this is almost 20 years ago. And one of them was trying to explain to the father what a great neshama the child was. And the other one was doing some arrangements. I just sat next to the guy. I just hugged him, put my arm around him. We said Tehillim together. And it's unspeakable. It's just and so to participate in someone else's pain is so important. Just being there gives a person relief. It gives a person a feeling that someone cares about them. And it doesn't have you don't have to say something in order to comfort. Exactly, be a good listener. And in that situation, you couldn't even speak. The only thing you could listen was to their screaming. The parents were just screaming at top of their lungs. They couldn't even say anything. And so the Ahavat Yisrael, we're talking about Sfirat Omer, we're almost up to Shavuot. It's really important that we should all excel in our Ahavat Yisrael. There should not be any more suffering, chas v'shalom, no one should have to suffer. But if chas v'shalom, in the final moments of Galut, there is suffering, there is pain, we learned from Levi, in the tribe of Levi, that they didn't say, oh, I'm going to learn Torah and I don't know any of the other tribes, or we're just going to lock ourselves up in the shul and we're going to. They had in mind, they thought about their colleagues, their cousins and their friends who were part of the slavery, and they felt it and they learned for them, and they wanted to bring in their own in the other one's zchut, that they should be able to have zchut, and the sorrow should be over as soon as possible. So I want to wish everybody B'ezrat Hashem Shu B'sorot Tovot. There should only be good news. Thank you so much for coming. Please don't stand up yet.